White Christmas. Hi movie review lovers friends. Today I am going to describe the movie story of White Christmas. Now let's talk about it. As we know that White Christmas is a 1954 American musical film directed by Michael Curtiz and starring Bing Crosby, Kaye, Rosemary Clooney, and Vera. Filmed in Technicolor, it features the songs of Irving Berlin, including a new version of the title song, White Christmas, introduced by Crosby in the 1942 film Holiday Inn. Produced and distributed by Paramount Pictures, the film is notable for being the first to be released in VistaVision, a widescreen process developed by Paramount that entailed using twice the surface area of standard 35mm film. This large area negative was also used to yield finer-grained standard-sized 35mm prints. In Europe in 1944, at the height of World War II, Broadway star Captain Bob Wallace and aspiring performer Private Phil Davis entertained the 151st Division with a Christmas Eve soldiers show. Major General Thomas F. Waverly, who has been reassigned, delivers an emotional farewell. Shortly after Waverly departs, enemy bombers attack. Phil is slightly wounded when he pulls Bob away from a collapsing wall. While recuperating in the camp infirmary, Phil suggests he and Bob form a double act. Bob dislikes the idea but feels obliged to try. After the war, the two become famous as song and dance team Wallace and Davis. Success follows in nightclubs and radio, prompting Phil to pursue their producing musical shows for the Broadway stage. While the team performs in Florida, Bob receives a letter from an army buddy asking them to review his sister's singing act at a nightclub there. The two watch the Haynes sisters act and meet elder sister Betty and younger sister Judy after the performance. Phil, wanting to marry off Bob, hopes he and Betty are mutually attracted. While Phil and Judy are dancing, Betty apologetically confesses to Bob that Judy actually wrote the letter. Bob humorously admires Judy's resourcefulness, though Betty thinks he is being cynical. Bing Crosby as Bob Wallace and Kaye as Phil Davis. Learning the sisters' landlord is falsely suing them for damages and has called the cops, Phil gives them his and Bob's train tickets to New York City. The group flees to the train station. The girls get Phil and Bob's sleeping compartment while the guys sit up all night in the club car, much to Bob's chagrin. The girls persuade Phil and Bob to forego New York and spend Christmas in Pine Tree, Vermont, where they are booked as performers. In Vermont, they discover that the lack of snow is keeping tourists away. Arriving at the empty Columbia Inn, Bob and Phil are aghast to discover that General Waverly is the nearly bankrupt owner, having invested his pension and life savings. Phil and Bob decide to stage a large musical at the inn, hoping to attract guests. Betty and Judy are included with the other performers. Meanwhile, Betty and Bob's romance starts to bloom. Later, Waverly tries to rejoin the army but is rejected. To cheer up the crestfallen general, Bob hatches a secret plan to reunite their old army regiment. He calls TV personality Ed Harrison, suggested by actual columnist and TV host Ed Sullivan, to ask his help. Ed's idea would exploit the general's misfortune on national television and give free publicity for Wallace and Davis. Bob strongly rejects his suggestion, insisting there is to be no personal advantage. Unfortunately, housekeeper Emma overhears only Harrison's end of the phone conversation and believes Bob is indeed exploiting the general's misfortune. She tells Betty, who rebuffs Bob. Her sudden distant coolness baffles him. Phil and Judy stage a phony engagement, hoping it will release Betty from looking after Judy and thus reunite Betty and Bob. However, this backfires when Betty leaves for a solo singing gig in New York. When Phil and Judy confess the truth to Bob, he rushes to New York to tell Betty. They partially reconcile, but Bob runs into Harrison before he can fully explain everything to Betty. When Bob appears on Harrison's TV show to request the entire 151st Division join him at Pine Tree to honor General Waverly, Betty realizes she misunderstood and behaved foolishly. She returns to Vermont to make amends and in time to join the show. On Christmas Eve, the soldiers surprise General Waverly. During the performance, Betty and Bob reconcile and Judy and Phil realize they are in love. As everyone sings White Christmas, a thick snowfall at last blankets Vermont. Cast: Bing Crosby as Bob Wallace and Danny Kaye as Phil Davis. Bing Crosby as Bob Wallace. Danny Kaye as Phil Davis. Rosemary Clooney as Betty Haynes. Vera Allen as Judy Haynes. Dean Jagger as Major General Tom Waverly. Mary Wicks as Emma Allen. John Brascia as John/Johnny, Judy Haynes' dance partner. And Whitfield as Susan Waverly, granddaughter. Uncredited. Johnny Grant as Ed Harrison. Percy Helton as train conductor. Stanford Jolly as railroad station master. Barry Chase as Doris Lenz, showgirl. George Chakiris as Betty Haynes' background dancer. Sig Ruman as hotel landlord. Grady Sutton as hopeful dancing partner. Herb Vigran as Novello. Leighton Noble as Novello's, Florida, bandleader. Dick Staville as Carousel Club bandleader. Irving Berlin suggested a movie based on his song in 1948. Paramount put up the $2 million budget and only took 30% of the proceeds. Norman Krasna had written the original story, which was intended for Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire. When Astaire was ultimately replaced by Danny Kaye, comedy writers Melvin Frank and Norman Panama were hired to add special material for Kaye. Panama and Frank felt that Krasna's entire script needed rewriting, and director Michael Curtiz agreed. "It was a torturous 8 weeks of rewriting," said Panama. Frank said that writing that movie was the worst experience of my life. Norman Krasna was a talented man, but it was the lousiest story I'd ever heard. It needed a brand new story, one that made sense. They rewrote the screenplay themselves at $5,000 a week. Principal photography took place between September and December 1953. The film was the first to be shot using Paramount's new VistaVision process, with color by Technicolor, and was one of the first to feature the Perspective directional sound system at limited engagements. Danny Kaye as Phil Davis and Vera Allen as Judy Haynes. White Christmas was intended to reunite Crosby and Fred Astaire for their third Irving Berlin Showcase musical. Crosby and Astaire had previously co-starred in Holiday Inn, 1942, where the song White Christmas first appeared, and Blue Skies, 1946. Astaire declined the project after reading the script 6 and asked to be released from his contract with Paramount. 7. Crosby also left the project shortly thereafter to spend more time with his sons after the death of his wife, Dixie Lee. 7. Near the end of January 1953, Crosby returned to the project, and Donald O'Connor was signed to replace Astaire. 7. Just before shooting was to begin, O'Connor had to drop out due to illness and was replaced by Danny Kaye, who asked for and received a salary of $200,000 and 10% of the gross. 6. Financially, the film was a partnership between Crosby, 30%, Irving Berlin, 30%, Paramount, 30%, and Kaye, 10%. 7-8. Within the film, several soon-to-be famous performers appear. Dancer Barry Chase appears on billed as the character Doris Lenz, Mutual I'm Sure. Future Oscar winner George Chakiris also appears 9 as one of the stone-faced, black-clad dancers surrounding Rosemary Clooney in Love, You Didn't Do Right by Me. Ensemble dancer John Brascia leads the dance troupe. Because there was no time for dance director Robert Alton to prepare Danny Kaye for all of the dance specialties, Brascia was pressed into service as Vera Allen's dancing partner throughout much of the movie, particularly in the Mandy choreography and Abraham numbers. The photo Vera Allen shows of her brother Benny, the one Phil refers to as freckle-faced Haynes, the dog-faced boy, is actually a photo of Carl Switzer, who played Alfalfa in the Our Gang film series, in an army field jacket and Jeep cap. A scene from the film featuring Crosby and Kaye was broadcast the year after the film's release, on Christmas Day 1955, in the final episode of the NBC TV show Colgate Comedy Hour, 1950 to 1955. Paramount reissued White Christmas in 1960 with an entirely new ad campaign, removing all references to VistaVision and stressing the glamorous show business atmosphere. The song Snow was originally written for Call Me Madam with the title Free, but was dropped in out-of-town tryouts. The melody and some of the words were kept, but the lyrics were changed to be more appropriate for a Christmas movie. For example, one of the lines of the original song is, Free. The only thing worth fighting for is to be free. Free. A different world you'd see if it were left to me. A composer's demo of the original song can be found on the CD Irving Sings Berlin. Rosemary Clooney as Betty Haynes and Bing Crosby as Bob Wallace. The song, What Can He Do with the General, was originally written for an unproduced project called Stars on My Shoulders. Trudy Stevens provided the singing voice for Vera Ellen, including in Sisters. The first edition of Vera Ellen's biography by David Soren made the mistake of suggesting that perhaps Clooney sang for Vera in Sisters. The second edition of the biography corrected that error by adding this. Appropriately, they sing Sisters, with Rosemary Clooney actually duetting with Trudy Stabill, wife of popular bandleader Dick Stabill, who sang under the stage name Trudy Stevens and who had been personally recommended for the dubbing part by Clooney. Originally, Gloria Wood was going to do Vera Ellen's singing until Clooney intervened on behalf of her friend. 10. It was not possible to issue an original soundtrack album of the film because Decca Records controlled the soundtrack rights, but Clooney was under exclusive contract with Columbia Records. Consequently, each company issued a separate soundtrack recording, Decca issuing selections from Irving Berlin's White Christmas, while Columbia issued Irving Berlin's White Christmas. On the former, the song Sisters, as well as all of Clooney's vocal parts, was recorded by Peggy Lee, while on the latter, the song was sung by Clooney and her own sister, Betty, 11. The film's original soundtrack recordings were finally issued on CD by Sepia Records in 2022, and subsequently on vinyl records. Berlin wrote A Singer, a Dancer for Crosby and his planned co-star Fred Astaire. When Astaire became unavailable, Berlin rewrote it as A Crooner, a comic for Crosby and Donald O'Connor, but when O'Connor left the project, so did the song. Another song written by Berlin for the film was Sittin' in the Sun, Countin' My Money, but because of delays in production, Berlin decided to publish it independently. 12. Crosby and Kaye also recorded another Berlin song, Santa Claus, for the opening World War II Christmas Eve show scene, but it was not used in the final film. Their recording of the song survives, however, and can be found on the Bear Family Records 7 CD set titled Come On to My House. White Christmas earned $12 million in theatrical rentals, equal to $140 million in 2024, making it the highest-grossing film of 1954. 14. It was also the highest-grossing musical film at the time, 15, and ranks among the top 100 popular movies of all time at the domestic box office when adjusted for inflation and the size of the population in its release year of 1954. 16. Between the original release and subsequent revivals, the film grossed $30 million at the domestic box office. 3. Critical response. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 76% of 45 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of June 6, 10. The website's consensus reads, "It may be too sweet for some, but this unabashedly sentimental holiday favorite is too cheerful to resist." 17. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 56 out of 100, based on 17 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. 18. Contemporary reception. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times was not impressed. The use of VistaVision, which is another process of projecting on a wide, flat screen, has made it possible to endow White Christmas with a fine pictorial quality. The colors on the big screen are rich and luminous, the images are clear and sharp, and rapid movements are got without blurring or very little, such as sometimes is seen on other large screens. Director Michael Curtiz has made his picture look good. It is too bad that it doesn't hit the eardrums and the funny bone with equal force. 19. Kate Cameron of the New York Daily News gave the film 4 stars, writing that, given an Irving Berlin score, a sentimental and amusing book by Melvin Frank and the two Normans, Krasna and Panama, a cast headed by Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye, Rosemary Clooney and Vera Ellen, not to mention Dean Jagger, Mary Wicks and dancer John Brascia in the supporting roles, and a production all wrapped up in Technicolor, White Christmas adds up to first-class entertainment. There is a lot of talent animating this VistaVision production, and the principals work hard to catch the interest of the audience and hold it throughout. Bing and Danny are well-teamed and, with Rosemary Clooney's considerable help, sing the tuneful Berlin numbers with verve. Vera Ellen dances delightfully with Kaye and Brashia. 20. Philip K. Scheuer of the Los Angeles Times positively reviewed the film, describing it as a great, big, physically glittering, tower Technicolor musical that sounds like a dream production with a dream cast. 21. Dick Williams of the Los Angeles Mirror negatively reviewed the film, saying that it suffers from an exceedingly lightweight storyline engineered by the usually reliable team of Norman Panama and Melvin Frank plus Norman Krasna. It has so few humorous lines in it that it is all co-stars Crosby and Danny Kaye can do to conjure up an occasional chuckle. 22. William Brogdon of Variety wrote, White Christmas should be a natural at the box office, introducing as it does Paramount's new VistaVision system with such a hot combination as Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye, and an Irving Berlin score. Crosby and Kaye, along with VV, keep the entertainment going in this fancifully staged Robert Emmett Dolan production, clicking so well the teaming should call for a repeat. Certainly, Crosby, has never had a more facile partner than Kaye against whom to bounce his misleading nonchalance. 23. Harrison's Reports wrote, although not sensational, White Christmas is a pleasing entertainment. There are, however, spots where it becomes quite slow and boresome, the slowness in the action being caused by the many rehearsals in preparation of the big show. On the whole, the action is pleasing and it puts the spectator in a happy frame of mind. The Irving Berlin songs are, of course, an important part of the attraction and all are tuneful. 24. A user of the Maytiny pseudonym in the Chicago Daily Tribune wrote that Mr. Crosby seems a bit awkward at his romancing, but does all right with other chores. The music is pleasant, the stars likable, and while some may find it a bit on the sugary side, the family trade will undoubtedly find it an appetizing lollipop for a holiday treat. 25. Hortense Morton of the San Francisco Examiner called it a gay, extremely light-hearted picture full of fun and frolic. 26. Mildred Martin of the Philadelphia Inquirer wrote that since so far as story went, Holiday and was no great shakes, there's not much point in comparing White Christmas unfavorably with its celluloid parent. Even so, the present script concocted by such ordinarily resourceful writers as Norman Krasna, Norman Panama and Melvin Frank is thin to the point of emaciation, and dismally lacking in humor or freshness, but praised the VistaVision process. 27. Jack Carr of the Toronto Daily Star remarked that on this introductory offer of VistaVision, Paramount spent a mint. It got Irving Berlin to add some new songs to a collection of his past favorites. It got Robert Emmett Dolan to stage the whole works and Michael Curtiz to direct it. And it put the script into the hands of three top screenwriters, Norman Krasna, Norman Panama and Melvin Frank. With this latter team at work, it may be surprising that a screenplay of greater originality has not resulted. 28. Walter O'Hearn of the Montreal Star said that if this had been a Crosby Hope enterprise, it could have been called Road to Vermont, and then it might have been fun. As it is, the show opens on a wrong and mawkish military note and progresses to the usual plug for the great heart of show business, something I have heard about for years, but have been unable to verify in fact. 29. Harold Whitehead of the Montreal Gazette said that it harks back nostalgically to a former type of musical extravaganza that Hollywood used to be so fond of turning out. Lately, the Hollywood musicals have gone in, and successfully, for originality and artistry of a high order. White Christmas, as is fitting for the season, uses all the traditional props and storylines and leaves Messrs. Crosby and Kaye free to work their casual magic on the big screen. And work it they do. 30. A review in Time magazine described the film as a big fat yam of a picture richly candied with VistaVision, Paramount's answer to CinemaScope, Technicolor, tunes by Irving Berlin, massive production numbers, and big stars. Unfortunately, the yam is still a yam. 31. A review from Clyde Gilmore in the Canadian magazine Maclean stated that Danny Kaye and Bing Crosby at their best are funny enough together to deserve a sequel, although not all the production numbers in this big Irving Berlin musical are successful. Rosemary Clooney, Dean Jagger and Vera Ellen are also on hand. The Technicolor camera work, in the new VistaVision process is uncommonly bright and pleasing. 32. A review in The Guardian wrote that there is, on this evidence, nothing much wrong with VistaVision. The shape of its huge screen is in accordance with the normal picture seen by the human eye. It is high as well as wide and does not, therefore, look like a vast letterbox, and it gives a nice impression of depth. Alas, there is much wrong with the film itself. This musical is unfair both to Kaye and to Crosby, both of whom can be very funny when their scriptwriters permit. 33. Later critiques. As the film evolved to become a Christmas classic, critical analysis moved to the film's depictions of 1950s American culture. The feminist film theorist Linda Mizoguski commented that, although the film invoked nostalgia for minstrel shows and homoerotic buddy films, it also disavows both forms of entertainment as verboten due to changing cultural norms. 34. Monica Hesse, writing 64 years after the film's release, attributed the film's enduring popularity to its unabashed depictions of contemporary racism and sexism, serving to inspire viewers to continue pressing for cultural reform. 35. Home media. White Christmas was released on VHS in 1986 and again in 1997. The first US DVD release was in 2000. It was subsequently re-released in 2009 with a commensurate Blu-ray in 2010. The film was reissued in a 4-disc Diamond Anniversary Edition on October 14, 2014. This collection contains a Blu-ray with supplemental features, 2 DVDs with the film and an audio commentary by Clooney, and a 4th disc of Christmas songs on CD. These songs are performed individually by Crosby, Clooney, and Kaye. 36. A 70th anniversary 4K Blu-ray disc was released on November 4, 2024. Stage adaptation. Main article, White Christmas, musical. A stage adaptation of the musical, titled Irving Berlin's White Christmas, premiered in San Francisco in 2004, 37, and has played in various venues in the United States, such as Boston, Buffalo, Los Angeles, Detroit, and Louisville. 38. 39, 40, 41, 42, 43. The musical played a limited engagement on Broadway at the Marquis Theatre from November 14, 2008, until January 4, 2009. The musical also toured the United Kingdom from 2006 to 2008. It then headed to the Sunderland Empire in Sunderland from November 2010 to January 2011 after a successful earlier run in Manchester, and continued in various cities with a London West End run at the end of 2014. Musical film is a film genre in which songs by the characters are interwoven into the narrative, sometimes accompanied by dancing. The songs usually advance the plot or develop the film's characters, but in some cases, they serve merely as breaks in the storyline, often as elaborate production numbers. The musical film was a natural development of the stage musical after the emergence of sound film technology. Typically, the biggest difference between film and stage musicals is the use of lavish background scenery and locations that would be impractical in a theater. Musical films characteristically contain elements reminiscent of theater. Performers often treat their song and dance numbers as if a live audience were watching. In a sense, the viewer becomes the diegetic audience, as the performer looks directly into the camera and performs to it. With the advent of sound in the late 1920s, musicals gained popularity with the public and are exemplified by the films of Busby Berkeley, a choreographer known for his distinctive and elaborate set pieces featuring multiple showgirls. These lavish production numbers are typified by his choreographic work in 42nd Street, Gold Diggers of 1933, Footlight Parade, all from 1933. During the 1930s, the musical films of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers became massive cultural fixtures in the eyes of the American public. These films included Top Hat, 1935, Follow the Fleet, Swing Time, both 1936, and Shall We Dance, 1937. Victor Fleming's The Wizard of Oz, 1939, would become a landmark film for movie musical as it experimented with new technology such as Technicolor. During the 1940s and 1950s, musical films from MGM Musicals regularly premiered. These works included Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944, Easter Parade, 1948, On the Town, 1949, An American in Paris, 1951, Singin' in the Rain, 1952, The Bandwagon, 1953, High Society, 1956, and Gigi, 1958. During this time, films outside the Arthur Freed unit at MGM included Holiday Inn, 1942, White Christmas, 1954, and Funny Face, 1957, as well as Oklahoma, 1955, The King and I, 1956, Carousel, and South Pacific, 1958. These films of the era typically relied on the star power of such film stars as Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland and Miller, Katherine Grayson, and Howard Keel. They also relied on film directors such as Stanley Donen and Vincente Minnelli, as well as songwriters Comden and Green, Rogers and Hammerstein, Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, and the Gershwin brothers. During the 1960s, films based on stage musicals continued to be critical and box office successes. These films included West Side Story, 1961, Gypsy, 1962, The Music Man, 1962, Bye Bye Birdie, 1963, My Fair Lady, Mary Poppins, both 1964, The Sound of Music, 1965, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, Thoroughly Modern Millie, all 1967, Oliver, and Funny Girl, both 1968. In the 1970s, film culture and the changing demographics of filmgoers placed greater emphasis on gritty realism, while the pure entertainment and theatricality of classical-era Hollywood musicals was seen as old-fashioned. Despite this, Scrooge, 1970, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, 1971, Fiddler on the Roof, 1971, Cabaret, 1972, 1776, 1972, Disney's Bedknobs and Broomsticks, 1971, and Pete's Dragon, 1977, as well as Grease and The Wiz, both 1978, were more traditional musicals closely adapted from stage shows and were strong successes with critics and audiences. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, musicals tended to be mainly coming from the Disney animated films of the period, from composers and lyricists Howard Ashman, Alan Menken, and Stephen Schwartz. The Disney Renaissance started with 1989's The Little Mermaid, then followed by Beauty and the Beast, 1991, Aladdin, 1992, The Lion King, 1994, Pocahontas, 1995, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1996, Hercules, 1997, and Mulan, 1998. In the 21st century, the musical genre has been rejuvenated with darker musicals, musical biopics, musical remakes, epic drama musicals, and comedy drama musicals such as Moulin Rouge, 2001, Chicago, 2002, The Phantom of the Opera, 2004, Rent, 2005, Dreamgirls, 2006, Across the Universe, Enchanted, Hairspray, Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, all 2007, Mamma Mia, 2008, 2009, The Muppets, 2011, Les Miserables, 2012, Into the Woods, 2014, Descendants, 2015, La La Land, 2016, Beauty and the Beast, The Greatest Showman, both 2017, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, A Star is Born, Mary Poppins Returns, Bohemian Rhapsody, all 2018, Aladdin, Rocketman, The Lion King, all 2019, The Prom, 2020, In the Heights, Respect, Dear Evan Hansen, Cyrano, Everybody's Talking About Jamie, Tick, Tick, Boom, West Side Story, all 2021, Elvis, Spirited, Disenchanted, Matilda the Musical, all 2022, The Little Mermaid, Wonka, The Color Purple, all 2023, Mean Girls, Wicked, Mufasa, The Lion King, Joker, Fully Adu, A Complete Unknown, Better Man, all 2024, Kiss of the Spider-Woman, Snow White, Blue Moon, Springsteen, Deliver Me from Nowhere, Wicked, For Good, all 2025. 1930 to 1950, the first classical sound era or first musical era. The 1930s through the early 1950s are considered to be the golden age of the musical film, when the genre's popularity was at its highest in the Western world. Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the earliest Disney animated feature film, was a musical which won an honorary Oscar for Walt Disney at the 11th Academy Awards. Musical short films were made by Lee DeForest in 1923 to 24. Beginning in 1926, thousands of Vitaphone shorts were made, many featuring bands, vocalists, and dancers. The earliest feature-length films with synchronized sound had only a soundtrack of music and occasional sound effects that played while the actors portrayed their characters just as they did in silent films, without audible dialogue. 1. The Jazz Singer, released in 1927 by Warner Brothers, was the first to include an audio track including non-diegetic music and diegetic music, but it had only a short sequence of spoken dialogue. This feature-length film was also a musical, featuring Al Jolson singing Dirty Hands, Dirty Face, Toot, Toot, Tootsie, Blue Skies, and My Mammy. Historian Scott Amon wrote, "As the film ended and applause grew with the house lights, Sam Goldwyn's wife Frances looked around at the celebrities in the crowd. She saw terror in all their faces," she said, as if they knew that the game they had been playing for years was finally over. 2. Still, only isolated sequences featured live sound. Most of the film had only a synchronous musical score. 1. In 1928, Warner Brothers followed this up with another Jolson part talkie, The Singing Fool, which was a blockbuster hit. Theaters scrambled to install the new sound equipment and to hire Broadway composers to write musicals for the screen. 3. The first all-talking feature, Lights of New York, included a musical sequence in a nightclub. The enthusiasm of audiences was so great that in less than a year, all the major studios were making sound pictures exclusively. The Broadway Melody, 1929, had a showbiz plot about two sisters competing for a charming song and dance man. Advertised by MGM as the first all-talking, all-singing, all-dancing feature film, it was a hit and won the Academy Award for Best Picture for 1929. There was a rush by the studios to hire talent from the stage to star in lavishly filmed versions of Broadway hits. The Love Parade, Paramount 1929, starred Maurice Chevalier and newcomer Jeanette MacDonald, written by Broadway veteran Guy Bolton. Warner Brothers produced the first screen operetta, The Desert Song, in 1929. They spared no expense and photographed a large percentage of the film in Technicolor. This was followed by the first all-color, all-talking musical feature, which was entitled On With the Show, 1929. The most popular film of 1929 was the second all-color, all-talking feature, which was entitled Gold Diggers of Broadway, 1929. This film broke all box office records and remained the highest-grossing film ever produced until 1939. Suddenly, the market became flooded with musicals, revues, and operettas. The following all-color musicals were produced in 1929 and 1930 alone: The Hollywood Review of 1929, 1929, The Show of Shows, 1929, Sally, 1929, The Vagabond King, 1930, Follow Through, 1930, Bright Lights, 1930, Golden Dawn, 1930, Hold Everything, 1930, The Rogue Song, 1930, Song of the Flame, 1930, Song of the West, 1930, Sweet Kitty Bellairs, 1930, Under a Texas Moon, 1930, Bride of the Regiment, 1930, Whoopee, 1930, King of Jaws, 1930, Viennese Nights, 1930, and Kiss Me Again, 1930. In addition, there were scores of musical features released with color sequences. Hollywood released more than 100 musical films in 1930, but only 14 in 1931, 4 by late 1930. Audiences had been oversaturated with musicals and studios were forced to cut the music from films that were then being released. For example, Life of the Party, 1930, was originally produced as an all-color, all-talking musical comedy. Before it was released, however, the songs were cut out. The same thing happened to 50 Million Frenchmen, 1931, and Manhattan Parade, 1932, both of which had been filmed entirely in Technicolor. Marlene Dietrich sang songs successfully in her films, and Rogers and Hart wrote a few well-received films, but even their popularity waned by 1932. 4. The public had quickly come to associate color with musicals, and thus the decline in their popularity also resulted in a decline in color productions. Busby Berkeley. The taste in musicals revived again in 1933 when director Busby Berkeley began to enhance the traditional dance number with ideas drawn from the drill precision he had experienced as a soldier during World War I. In films such as 42nd Street and Gold Diggers of 1933, Berkeley choreographed a number of films in his unique style. Berkeley's numbers typically begin on a stage but gradually transcend the limitations of theatrical space. His ingenious routines, involving human bodies forming patterns like a kaleidoscope, could never fit onto a real stage, and the intended perspective is viewing from straight above. 5. Musical stars. Musical stars such as Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers were among the most popular and highly respected personalities in Hollywood during the classical era. The Fred and Ginger pairing was particularly successful, resulting in a number of classic films such as Top Hat, 1935, Swing Time, 1936, and Shall We Dance, 1937. Many dramatic actors gladly participated in musicals as a way to break away from their typecasting. For instance, the multi-talented James Cagney had originally risen to fame as a stage singer and dancer, but his repeated casting in tough guy roles and mob films gave him few chances to display these talents. Cagney's Oscar-winning role in Yankee Doodle Dandy, 1942, allowed him to sing and dance, and he considered it to be one of his finest moments. Many comedies and a few dramas included their own musical numbers. The Marx Brothers films included a musical number in nearly every film, allowing the brothers to highlight their musical talents. Their final film, entitled Love Happy, 1949, featured Vera Ellen, considered to be the best dancer among her colleagues and professionals in the half-century. Similarly, the vaudevillian comedian W.C. Fields joined forces with the comic actress Martha Raye and the young comedian Bob Hope in Paramount Pictures' musical anthology The Big Broadcast of 1938. The film also showcased the talents of several internationally recognized musical artists including Kirsten Flagstad, Norwegian operatic soprano, Wilfrid Pelletier, Canadian conductor of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, Tito Geyser, Mexican tenor, Shep Fields conducting his rippling rhythm jazz orchestra, and John Seri Sr., Italian-American concert accordionist. 6. In addition to the Academy Award for Best Original Song, 1938, the film earned an ASCAP Film and Television Award, 1989 for Bob Hope's signature song, Thanks for the Memory. 7. The Freed Unit. Duration, 1 hour, 25 minutes and 28 seconds. 1 to 25 to 28. Rock, 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 a musical movie from 1956. During the late 1940s and into the early 1950s, a production unit at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, headed by Arthur Freed, made the transition from old-fashioned musical films, whose formula had become repetitive, to something new. However, they also produced Technicolor remakes of such musicals as Showboat, which had previously been filmed in the 1930s. In 1939, Freed was hired as associate producer for the film Babes in Arms. Starting in 1944 with Meet Me in St. Louis, the Freed unit worked somewhat independently of its own studio to produce some of the most popular and well-known examples of the genre. The products of this unit include Easter Parade, 1948, On the Town, 1949, An American in Paris, 1951, Singin' in the Rain, 1952, The Bandwagon, 1953, and Gigi, 1958. Non-Freed musicals from the studio included Seven Brides for Seven Brothers in 1954 and High Society in 1956, and the studio distributed Samuel Goldwyn's Guys and Dolls in 1955. This era saw musical stars become household names, including Judy Garland, Gene Kelly, and Miller, Donald O'Connor, Sid Charisse, Mickey Rooney, Vera Ellen, Jane Powell, Howard Keel, and Katherine Grayson. Fred Astaire was also coaxed out of retirement for Easter Parade and made a permanent comeback. Outside and GM. The other Hollywood studios proved themselves equally adept at tackling the genre at this time, particularly in the 1950s. For adaptations of Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, Oklahoma, The King and I, Carousel, and South Pacific were all successes, while Paramount Pictures released White Christmas and Funny Face, two films which used previously written music by Irving Berlin and the Gershwins, respectively. Warner Brothers produced Calamity Jane and A Star is Born. The former film was a vehicle for Doris Day, while the latter provided a big-screen comeback for Judy Garland, who had been out of the spotlight since 1950. Meanwhile, director Otto Preminger, better known for Message Pictures, made Carmen Jones and Porgy and Bess, both starring Dorothy Dandridge, who is considered the first African-American A-list film star. Celebrated director Howard Hawks also ventured into the genre with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. This section possibly contains original research. Please improve it by verifying the claims made and adding inline citations. Statements consisting only of original research should be removed. October 2010. Learn how and when to remove this message. In the 1960s, 1970s, and continuing up to today, the musical film became less of a bankable genre that could be relied upon for surefire hits. Audiences for them lessened and fewer musical films were produced as the genre became less mainstream and more specialized. The 1960s musical. In the 1960s, the critical and box office success of the films West Side Story, Gypsy, The Music Man, Bye Bye Birdie, My Fair Lady, Mary Poppins, The Sound of Music, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Foreign, The Jungle Book, Thoroughly Modern Millie, Oliver, and Funny Girl suggested that the traditional musical was in good health, while French filmmaker Jacques Demy's jazz musicals The Umbrellas of Cherbourg and The Young Girls of Rochefort were popular with international critics. However, popular musical tastes were being heavily affected by rock and roll and the freedom and youth associated with it, and indeed Elvis Presley made a few films that have been equated with the old musicals in terms of form. A Hard Day's Night and Help, starring the Beatles, were audacious. Most of the musical films of the 1950s and 1960s, such as Oklahoma and The Sound of Music, were straightforward adaptations or restagings of successful stage productions. The most successful musicals of the 1960s created specifically for film were Mary Poppins and The Jungle Book, two of Disney's biggest hits of all time. The phenomenal box office performance of The Sound of Music gave the major Hollywood studios more confidence to produce lengthy, large-budget musicals. Despite the resounding success of some of these films, Hollywood also produced a large number of musical flops in the late 1960s and early 1970s, which appeared to seriously misjudge public taste. The commercially and/or critically unsuccessful films included Camelot, Finian's Rainbow, Hello Dolly, Sweet Charity, Dr. Dolittle, Half a Sixpence, The Happiest Millionaire, Star, Darling Lily, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, Paint Your Wagon. Song of Norway, On a Clear Day You Can See Forever, 1776, Man of La Mancha, Lost Horizon, and Mame. Collectively and individually, these failures affected the financial viability of several major studios. 1970s. In the 1970s, film culture and the changing demographics of filmgoers placed greater emphasis on gritty realism, while the pure entertainment and theatricality of classical-era Hollywood musicals was seen as old-fashioned. Despite this, Fiddler on the Roof and Cabaret were more traditional musicals closely adapted from stage shows and were strong successes with critics and audiences. Changing cultural mores and the abandonment of the Hays Code in 1968 also contributed to changing tastes in film audiences. The 1973 film of Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice's Jesus Christ Superstar was met with some criticism by religious groups, but was well received. By the mid-1970s, filmmakers avoided the genre in favor of using music by popular rock or pop bands as background music, partly in hope of selling a soundtrack album to fans. The Rocky Horror Picture Show was originally released in 1975 and was a critical failure until it started midnight screenings in the 1980s, where it achieved cult status. That same year also saw the premiere of the R&B band Bloodstone's movie Train Ride to Hollywood, but problems in distribution rendered it barely getting token theatrical release. 8. The year 1976 saw the release of the low-budget comic musical, the first nudie musical, released by Paramount. The 1978 film version of Grease was a smash hit. Its songs were original compositions done in a 1950s pop style. However, the sequel Grease 2, released in 1982, bombed at the box office. Films about performers which incorporated gritty drama and musical numbers interwoven as a diegetic part of the storyline were produced, such as Lady Sings the Blues, All That Jazz, and New York, New York. Some musicals made in Britain experimented with the form, such as Richard Attenborough's Oh, What a Lovely War, released in 1969, Alan Parker's Bugsy Malone, and Ken Russell's Tommy and Listomania. A number of film musicals were still being made that were financially and/or critically less successful than in the musical's heyday. They include 1776, The Wiz, At Long Last Love, Mame, Man of La Mancha, Lost Horizon, Godspell, Phantom of the Paradise, Funny Lady, Barbra Streisand's sequel to Funny Girl, A Little Night Music, and Hair amongst others. The critical wrath against At Long Last Love, in particular, was so strong that it was never released on home video. Fantasy musical film Scrooge, The Blue Bird, The Little Prince, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Pete's Dragon, and Disney's Bedknobs and Broomsticks were also released in the 1970s, the latter winning the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. 1980s to 1990s. By the 1980s, financiers grew increasingly confident in the musical genre, partly buoyed by the relative health of the musical on Broadway and London's West End. Productions of the 1980s and 1990s included The Apple, Xanadu, The Blues Brothers, Annie, Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, Victor/Victoria, Footloose, Fast Forward, A Chorus Line, Little Shop of Horrors, Forbidden Zone, Absolute Beginners, Labyrinth, Newsies, Evita, and Everyone Says I Love You. However, Can't Stop the Music, starring the Village People, was a calamitous attempt to resurrect the old-style musical and was released to audience indifference in 1980. Little Shop of Horrors was based on an off-Broadway musical adaptation of a 1960 Roger Corman film, a precursor of later film-to-stage-to-film adaptations, including The Producers. Many animated films of the period, predominantly from Disney, included traditional musical numbers. Howard Ashman, Alan Menken, and Stephen Schwartz had previous musical theater experience and wrote songs for animated films during this time, supplanting Disney workhorses the Sherman Brothers. Starting with 1989's The Little Mermaid, the Disney Renaissance gave new life to the musical film. Other successful animated musicals included Aladdin, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Pocahontas from Disney proper, The Nightmare Before Christmas from Disney Division Touchstone Pictures, The Prince of Egypt from DreamWorks, Anastasia from Fox and Don Bluth, 8 Crazy Nights from Columbia, and South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut from Paramount and Warner Brothers. Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and others were adapted for the stage after their blockbuster success. 2000. Now, the second classical era or new musical era. 21st century musicals or New Age. In the 21st century, movie musicals were reborn with darker musicals, musical biopics, epic drama musicals, and comedy drama musicals such as Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Moulin Rouge, Chicago, Walk the Line, Dreamgirls, Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, Les Miserables, La La Land, and West Side Story, all of which won the Golden Globe Award for Best Motion Picture, musical or comedy in their respective years, while such films as The Phantom of the Opera, Hairspray, Mamma Mia, 9 Into the Woods, The Greatest Showman, Mary Poppins Returns, Rocketman, The Prom, Cyrano, Tick, Tick, Boone, Elvis, The Color Purple, and Wicked were only nominated. Chicago was also the first musical since Oliver to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Joshua Oppenheimer's Academy Award-nominated documentary, The Act of Killing, may be considered a non-fiction musical. 9. One specific musical trend was the rising number of jukebox musicals based on music from various pop/rock artists on the big screen, some of which based on Broadway shows. Examples of Broadway-based jukebox musical films included Mamma Mia, ABBA, Rock of Ages, and Sunshine on Leith, The Proclaimers. Original ones included Across the Universe, The Beatles' Moulin Rouge. Various pop hits Idlewild, Outcast, and Yesterday, The Beatles. Disney also returned to musicals with High School Musical, Enchanted, The Princess and the Frog, Tangled, Winnie the Pooh, The Muppets, Frozen, Muppets Most Wanted, Into the Woods, Moana, Mary Poppins Returns, Frozen 2, Stargirl, and Canto. Better Nate Than Ever, Hollywood Stargirl, Disenchanted, Wish, Moana 2 and Mufasa, The Lion King. Following a string of successes with live-action fantasy adaptations of several of their animated features, Disney produced a live-action version of Beauty and the Beast, the first of this live-action fantasy adaptation pack to be an all-out musical, and features new songs as well as new lyrics to both the Gaston number and the reprise of the title song. Bill Condon, who directed Dreamgirls, directed Beauty and the Beast. The second film of this live-action fantasy adaptation pack to be an all-out musical was Aladdin and features new songs. The third film of this live-action fantasy adaptation pack to be an all-out musical was The Lion King and features new songs. The fourth film of this live-action fantasy adaptation pack to be an all-out musical was The Little Mermaid and features new songs with lyrics by Lin-Manuel Miranda, replacing Ashman. Pixar also produced Coco, the first computer-animated musical film by the company. Other animated musical films include Happy Feet, Rio, Happy Feet 2, Dr. Seuss the Lorax, Rio 2, The Book of Life, Trolls, Sing, My Little Pony, The Movie, Smallfoot, Ugly Dolls, Trolls World Tour, Over the Moon, Vivo, Sing 2. The Bob's Burgers Movie, Under the Boardwalk, Trolls Band Together, Leo, Thelma the Unicorn, Spellbound, K-pop Demon Hunters, Smurfs, and The Twits. Biopics about music artists and showmen were also big in the 21st century. Examples include 8 Mile, Eminem, Ray Charles, Walk the Line, Johnny Cash and June Carter, La Vie en Rose, Edith Piaf, Notorious, Biggie Smalls, Jersey Boys, The Four Seasons, Love and Mercy, Brian Wilson, Crazy Sexy Cool, The TLC Story, TLC, Aaliyah, The Princess of R&B, Aaliyah, Get On Up, James Brown, Whitney and I Wanna Dance with Somebody, Whitney Houston, Straight Outta Compton, NWA, The Greatest Showman, P.T. Barnum, Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie Mercury, The Dirt, Motley Crue, Judy Garland, Rocketman, Elton John, Respect, Aretha Franklin, Elvis Presley, A Complete Unknown, Bob Dylan, and Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, Bruce Springsteen. Grossing over $900 million at the box office, Bohemian Rhapsody is the most commercially successful musical biopic. 10. Director Damien Chazelle created a musical film called La La Land, starring Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. It was meant to reintroduce the traditional jazz style of song numbers with influences from the golden age of Hollywood and Jacques Demy's French musicals, while incorporating a contemporary/modern take on the story and characters with balances in fantasy numbers and grounded reality. It received 14 nominations at the 89th Academy Awards, tying the record for most nominations with All About Eve, 1950, and Titanic, 1997, and won the awards for Best Director, Best Actress, Best Cinematography, Best Original Score, Best Original Song, and Best Production Design. Live television events. In 2013, NBC produced The Sound of Music Live. As part of their effort for expanded live entertainment events, which became an annual tradition of adaptations of stage musicals, created specifically as live television events. The following years featured Peter Pan Live, The Wiz Live, Hairspray Live, Jesus Christ Superstar Live, Dr. Seuss the Grinch Musical Live, and Annie Live. ABC and Fox also produced similar events, including Grease Live, A Christmas Story Live, Rent, Live, and The Little Mermaid Live. 11. Melodrama and romance are common ingredients to Bollywood films. Pictured Achet Kanya, 1936. Bollywood musicals have their roots in the traditional musical theatre of India, such as classical Indian musical theatre, Sanskrit drama, and Parsi theatre. Early Bombay filmmakers combined these Indian musical theatre traditions with a musical film format that emerged from early Hollywood sound films. 12. Other early influences on Bombay filmmakers included Urdu literature and the Arabian Nights. 13. The first Indian sound film, Ardeshir Irani's Alam Era, 1931, was a major commercial success. 14. There was clearly a huge market for talkies and musicals. Bollywood and all the regional film industries quickly switched to sound filming. In 1937, Ardeshir Irani, of Alam Era fame, made the first color film in Hindi, Kisan Kanya. The next year, he made another color film, a version of Mother India. However, color did not become a popular feature until the late 1950s. At this time, lavish romantic musicals and melodramas were the staple fare at the cinema. Golden Age, late 1940s, 1960s. Following India's independence, the period from the late 1940s to the early 1960s is regarded by film historians as the golden age of Hindi cinema. 15, 16, 17. Some of the most critically acclaimed Hindi films of all time were produced during this period. Examples include Pyasa, 1957, and Kagaz Ka Phool, 1959, directed by Guru Dutt and written by Abrar Alvi. Awara, 1951, and Shri 420, 1955, directed by Raj Kapoor and written by Khwaja Ahmadavas, and On, 1952, directed by Mehboob Khan and starring Dilip Kumar. These films expressed social themes mainly dealing with working-class life in India, particularly urban life in the former two examples. Awara presented the city as both a nightmare and a dream, while Pyasa critiqued the unreality of city life. 18. Mehboob Khan's Mother India, 1957, a remake of his earlier Aurat, 1940, was the first Indian film to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, which it lost by a single vote. 19. Mother India was also an important film that defined the conventions of Hindi cinema for decades. 20, 21, 22. In the 1960s and early 1970s, the industry was dominated by musical romance films with romantic hero leads, the most popular being Rajesh Khanna, 23. Other actors during this period include Shammi Kapoor, Jitendra, Sanjeev Kumar, and Shashi Kapoor, and actresses like Sharmila Tagore, Mumtaz, Saira Banu, Helen, and Asha Parekh. Classic Bollywood, 1970s, 1980s. By the start of the 1970s, Hindi cinema was experiencing thematic stagnation. 24. Dominated by musical romance films. 23. The arrival of screenwriter duo Salim, Javed, consisting of Salim Khan and Javed Akhtar, marked a paradigm shift, revitalizing the industry. 24. They began the genre of gritty, violent, Bombay underworld crime films in the early 1970s, with films such as Zanjeer, 1973, and Diwar, 1975. 25, 26. The 1970s was also when the name Bollywood was coined. 27, 28, and when the quintessential conventions of commercial Bollywood films were established. 29. Key to this was the emergence of the masala film genre, which combines elements of multiple genres: action, comedy, romance, drama, melodrama, musical. The masala film was pioneered in the early 1970s by filmmaker Nasir Hussain, 30, along with screenwriter duo Salim Javed, 29, pioneering the Bollywood blockbuster format. 29. Yedin Ki Barat, 1973, directed by Hussain and written by Salim Javed, has been identified as the first masala film and the first quintessentially Bollywood film. 31, 29. Salim Javed went on to write more successful masala films in the 1970s and 1980s. 29. Masala films launched Amitabh Bachchan into the biggest Bollywood movie star of the 1970s and 1980s. A landmark for the masala film genre was Amar Akbar Anthony, 1977, 32, 31, directed by Manmohan Desai and written by Kader Khan. Manmohan Desai went on to successfully exploit the genre in the 1970s and 1980s. Along with Bachchan, other popular actors of this era included Feroz Khan, 33, Mithun Chakraborty, Nasiruddin Shah, Jackie Shroff, Sanjay Dutt, Anil Kapoor, and Sunny Deol. Actresses from this era included Hema Malini, Jaya Bachchan, Rocky, Shabana Azmi, Zinat Aman, Parveen Babi, Rekha, Dimple Kapadia, Smita Patil, Jaya Prada, and Padmini Kolhapura, 34. New Bollywood, 1990s, present. In the late 1980s, Hindi cinema experienced another period of stagnation, with a decline in box office turnout due to increasing violence, decline in musical melodic quality, and rise in video piracy, leading to middle-class family audiences abandoning theaters. The turning point came with Kayamat Se Kayamat Tak, 1988, directed by Mansur Khan, written and produced by his father Nasir Hussain, and starring his cousin Amir Khan with Juhi Chawla. Its blend of youthfulness, wholesome entertainment, emotional quotients, and strong melodies lured family audiences back to the big screen. 35-36. It set a new template for Bollywood musical romance films that defined Hindi cinema in the 1990s. 36. The period of Hindi cinema from the 1990s onwards is referred to as New Bollywood cinema. 37. Linked to economic liberalization in India during the early 1990s. 38. By the early 1990s, the pendulum had swung back toward family-centric romantic musicals. Kayamat Se Kayamat Tak was followed by blockbusters such as Main Pyar Kiya, 1989, Chandni, 1989, Hum Aapki Hain Kaun, 1994, Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, 1995, Raja Hindustani, 1996, Dil To Pagal Hai, 1997, Pyar To Hona Hai the 1998, and Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, 1998. A new generation of popular actors emerged, such as Amir Khan, Aditya Pancholi, Ajay Devgan, Akshay Kumar, Salman Khan, Salim Khan's son, and Shah Rukh Khan, and actresses such as Madhuri Dixit, Sridevi, Juhi Chawla, Meenakshi Seshadri, Manisha Koirala, Kajol, and Karisma Kapoor, 34. Since the 1990s, the three biggest Bollywood movie stars have been the three Khans: Amir Khan, Shah Rukh Khan, and Salman Khan. 39-40 combined, they have starred in most of the top 10 highest-grossing Bollywood films. The three Khans have had successful careers since the late 1980s, 39, and have dominated the Indian box office since the 1990s, 41, across 3 decades, 42. Influence on Western films 2000s, present. Bess Luhrmann stated that his successful musical film Moulin Rouge, 2001, was directly inspired by Bollywood musicals. 43. The film pays homage to India, incorporating an Indian-themed play and a Bollywood-style dance sequence with a song from the film China Gate. The critical and financial success of Moulin Rouge, renewed interest in the then moribund Western live-action musical genre, and subsequently films such as Chicago, The Producers, Rent, Dreamgirls, and Hairspray were produced, fueling a renaissance of the genre. 44. The Guru and the 40-Year-Old Virgin also feature Indian-style song and dance sequences. The Bollywood musical Lagan, 2001, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. 2 other Bollywood films, Devdas, 2002, and Rang de Vasanthi, 2006, were nominated for the BAFTA Award for Best Film Not in the English Language, and Danny Boyle's Academy Award-winning Slumdog Millionaire, 2008, also features a Bollywood-style song and dance number during the film's end credits. Talika, 2022, was the first movie with maximum genres of music composed by Maharaja and registered as a world record holder in music. 45. Spanish musical films. Spain has a history and tradition of musical films that were made independent of Hollywood influence. The first films arise during the Second Spanish Republic of the 1930s and the advent of sound films. A few zarzuelas, Spanish operetta, were even adapted as screenplays during the silent era. The beginnings of the Spanish musical were focused on romantic Spanish archetypes, Andalusian villages and landscapes, gypsies, bandoleros, and copla, and other popular folk songs included in story development. These films had even more box office success than Hollywood premieres in Spain. The first Spanish film stars came from the musical genre, in Perio, Argentina, Estrelita Castro, Florian Rey, director, and, later, Lola Flores, Sarah Montiel, and Carmen Sevilla. The Spanish musical started to expand and grow. Juvenile stars appear and top the box office. Marisol, Joselito, Pilay and Mili, and Rocío Dúrcal were the major figures of musical films from the 1960s to 1970s. Due to Spanish transition to democracy and the rise of movida culture, the musical genre fell in production and box office, only saved by Carlos Saura and his flamenco musical films. Unlike the musical films of Hollywood and Bollywood, popularly identified with escapism, the Soviet musical was first and foremost a form of propaganda. Vladimir Lenin said that cinema was the most important of the arts. His successor, Joseph Stalin, also recognized the power of cinema in efficiently spreading Communist Party doctrine. Films were widely popular in the 1920s, but it was foreign cinema that dominated the Soviet filmgoing market. Films from Germany and the US proved more entertaining than Soviet director Sergei Eisenstein's historical dramas. 46. By the 1930s, it was clear that if the Soviet cinema was to compete with its Western counterparts, it would have to give audiences what they wanted, the glamour and fantasy they got from Hollywood. 47. The musical film, which emerged at that time, embodied the ideal combination of entertainment and official ideology. A struggle between laughter for laughter's sake and entertainment with a clear ideological message would define the golden age of the Soviet musical of the 1930s and 1940s. Then head of the film industry Boris Shumyatsky sought to emulate Hollywood's conveyor belt method of production, going so far as to suggest the establishment of a Soviet Hollywood. In 1930, the esteemed Soviet film director Sergei Eisenstein went to the United States with fellow director Grigory Alexandrov to study Hollywood's filmmaking process. The American films greatly impacted Alexandrov, particularly the musicals. 49. He returned in 1932, and in 1934 directed The Jolly Fellows, the first Soviet musical. The film was light on plot and focused more on the comedy and musical numbers. Party officials at first met the film with great hostility. Alexandrov defended his work by arguing the notion of laughter for laughter's sake. 50. Finally, when Alexandrov showed the film to Stalin, the leader decided that musicals were an effective means of spreading propaganda. Messages like the importance of collective labor and rags to riches stories would become the plots of most Soviet musicals. The success of The Jolly Fellows ensured a place in Soviet cinema for the musical format, but immediately Shumyatsky set strict guidelines to make sure the films promoted communist values. Shumyatsky's decree Movies for the Millions demanded conventional plots, characters, and montage to successfully portray socialist realism, the glorification of industry and the working class, on film. 51. The first successful blend of a social message and entertainment was Alexandrov's Circus, 1936. It starred his wife, Lyubov Orlova, an operatic singer who had also appeared in The Jolly Fellows, as an American circus performer who has to immigrate to the USSR from the US because she has a mixed-race child, whom she had with a black man. Amidst the backdrop of lavish musical productions, she finally finds love and acceptance in the USSR, providing the message that racial tolerance can only be found in the Soviet Union. The influence of Busby Berkeley's choreography on Alexandrov's directing can be seen in the musical number leading up to the climax. Another, more obvious reference to Hollywood is the Charlie Chaplin impersonator, who provides comic relief throughout the film. 4 million people in Moscow and Leningrad went to see Circus during its first month in theaters. Using wheeled vehicles running on tracks, which usually consist of 2 parallel steel rails, one rail transport is one of the 2 primary means of land transport, next to road transport. It is used for about 8% of passenger and freight transport globally. 2. thanks to its energy efficiency, too, and potentially high speed. Also, the track spreads the weight of the train, which means larger amounts can be carried than with trucks on roads. Management rail yard railway station list tramway track railway track maintenance gauge. Rolling stock. Bogie, truck, couplings freight locomotives multiple units passenger train commuter high-speed intercity regional railroad cars trains maglev mine trains rack railway funicular rubber-tired tram. Urban rail transit. Tram history cable car light rail tram train monorail history interurban light rapid transit history automated. Other topics. Accidents attractions by country companies list of high-speed trains list of speed records in rail transport longest train services platform screen doors modeling museums operating railway speed record subsidies terminology AU, NA, NZ, UK. Icon transport portal. VEAT. Rolling stock on rails generally encounters lower frictional resistance than rubber-tired road vehicles, allowing rail cars to be coupled into longer trains. Power is usually provided by diesel or electric locomotives. While railway transport is capital-intensive and less flexible than road transport, it can carry heavy loads of passengers and cargo with greater energy efficiency and safety. Precursors of railways driven by human or animal power have existed since antiquity, but modern rail transport began with the invention of the steam locomotive in the United Kingdom at the beginning of the 19th century. The first passenger railway, the Stockton and Darlington Railway, opened in 1825. The quick spread of railways throughout Europe and North America, following the 1830 opening of the first intercity connection in England, was a key component of the Industrial Revolution. The adoption of rail transport lowered shipping costs compared to transport by water or wagon, and led to national markets in which prices vary less from city to city. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Railroads not only increased the speed of transport, they also dramatically lowered its cost. For example, the first transcontinental railroad in the United States resulted in passengers and freight being able to cross the country in a matter of days instead of months, and at 1/10 the cost of stagecoach or wagon transport. With economical transportation in the West, which had been referred to as the Great American Desert, now farming, ranching, and mining could be done at a profit. As a result, railroads transformed the country, particularly the West, which had few navigable rivers. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. In the 1880s, railway electrification began with tramways and rapid transit systems. Starting in the 1940s, steam locomotives were replaced by diesel locomotives. The first high-speed railway system was introduced in Japan in 1964, and high-speed rail lines now connect many cities in Europe, East Asia, and the eastern United States. Following some decline due to competition from cars and airplanes, rail transport has had a revival in recent decades due to road congestion and rising fuel prices, as well as governments investing in rail as a means of reducing CO2 emissions. History. Main article. History of rail transport. Smooth, durable road surfaces have been made for wheeled vehicles since prehistoric times. In some cases, they were narrow and in pairs to support only the wheels. That is, they were wagonways or tracks. Some had grooves or flanges or other mechanical means to keep the wheels on track. For example, evidence indicates that a 6 to 8.5 kilometers long dialkos paved trackway transported boats across the Isthmus of Corinth in Greece from around 600 BC. The dialkos was in use for over 650 years, until at least the 1st century AD. 15. Paved trackways were also later built in Roman Egypt. 16. Pre-steam modern systems. See also funicular, wagaway, tramway, industrial, and flayway. Wooden rails introduced. A 16th century minecart, an early example of unpowered rail transport, used manpower to operate. In 1515, Cardinal Matthias Lang wrote a description of the Reisig, a funicular railway at the Hohensalzburg fortress in Austria. The line originally used wooden rails and a hemp haulage rope and was operated by human or animal power through a tread wheel. 17. The line is still operational, although in updated form, and is possibly the oldest operational railway. 18. Wagonways, or tramways, using wooden rails, hauled by horses, started appearing in the 1550s to facilitate the transport of ore tubs to and from mines, and soon became popular in Europe. Such an operation was illustrated in Germany in 1556 by Georgius Agricola in his work De Re Metallica. 19. This line used hunt carts with unflaned wheels running on wooden planks and a vertical pin on the truck fitting into the gap between the planks to keep it going the right way. The miners called the wagons hunt dogs from the noise they made on the tracks. 20. There are many references to their use in Central Europe in the 16th century. 21. Such a transport system was later used by German miners at Caldbeck, Cumbria, England, perhaps from the 1560s. 22. A wagonway was built at Prescott, near Liverpool, sometime around 1600, possibly as early as 1594. Owned by Philip Layton, the line carried coal from a pit near Prescott Hall to a terminus about 1/2 mile, 800 m, away. 23. A funicular railway was also made at Broseley in Shropshire some time before 1604. This carried coal for James Clifford from his mines down to the River Severn to be loaded onto barges and carried to riverside towns. 24. The Woollerton Wagonway, completed in 1604 by Huntingdon Beaumont, has sometimes erroneously been cited as the earliest British railway. It ran from Strully to Woollerton near Nottingham. 25. The Middleton Railway in Leeds, which was built in 1758, later became the world's oldest operational railway, other than funiculars, albeit now in an upgraded form. In 1764, the first railway in the Americas was built in Lewiston, New York. 26. Metal rails introduced. A replica of a Little Eaton tramway wagon, 1795, the tracks are plateways. A cast-iron fish belly edge rail manufactured by Outram at the Butterley Company for the Cromford and High Peak Railway in 1831. These are smooth edge rails for wheels with flanges. In the late 1760s, the Coalbrookdale Company began to fix plates of cast iron to the upper surface of the wooden rails. This allowed a variation of gauge to be used. At first, only balloon loops could be used for turning, but later, movable points were taken into use that allowed for switching. 27. A system was introduced in which unflaned wheels ran on L-shaped metal plates, which came to be known as playways. John Kerr, a Sheffield colliery manager, invented this flanged rail in 1787, though the exact date of this is disputed. The plate rail was taken up by Benjamin Outram for wagonways serving his canals, manufacturing them at his Butterley Ironworks. In 1803, William Jessup opened the Surrey Iron Railway, a double-track playway, erroneously sometimes cited as world's first public railway, in South London. 28. William Jessup had earlier used a form of all-iron edge rail and flanged wheels successfully for an extension to the Charnwood Forest Canal at Nanpanton, Loughborough, Leicestershire in 1789. In 1790, Jessup and his partner Outram began to manufacture edge rails. Jessup became a partner in the Butterley Company in 1790. The first public edgeway, thus also first public railway, built was Lake Lock Railroad in 1796. Although the primary purpose of the line was to carry coal, it also carried passengers. These two systems of constructing iron railways, the L-plate rail and the smooth edge rail, continued to exist side by side until well into the early 19th century. The flanged wheel and edge rail eventually proved its superiority and became the standard for railways. Cast iron used in rails proved unsatisfactory because it was brittle and broke under heavy loads. The wrought iron invented by John Birkinshaw in 1820 replaced cast iron. Wrought iron, usually simply referred to as iron, was a ductile material that could undergo considerable deformation before breaking, making it more suitable for iron rails. But iron was expensive to produce until Henry Court patented the puddling process in 1784. In 1783, Court also patented the rolling process, which was 15 times faster at consolidating and shaping iron than hammering. 29. These processes greatly lowered the cost of producing iron and rails. The next important development in iron production was hot blast, developed by James Beaumont Nielsen, patented 1828, which considerably reduced the amount of coke, fuel, or charcoal needed to produce pig iron. 30. Wrought iron was a soft material that contained slag or dross. The softness and dross tended to make iron rails distort and delaminate, and they lasted less than 10 years. Sometimes they lasted as little as 1 year under high traffic. All these developments in the production of iron eventually led to the replacement of composite wood/iron rails with superior all-iron rails. The introduction of the Bessemer process, enabling steel to be made inexpensively, led to the era of great expansion of railways that began in the late 1860s. Steel rails lasted several times longer than iron. 31, 32, 33. Steel rails made heavier locomotives possible, allowing for longer trains and improving the productivity of railroads. 34. The Bessemer process introduced nitrogen into the steel, which caused the steel to become brittle with age. The open hearth furnace began to replace the Bessemer process near the end of the 19th century, improving the quality of steel and further reducing costs. Thus, steel completely replaced the use of iron in rails, becoming standard for all railways. The first passenger horsecar or tram, Swansea and Mumbles Railway, was opened between Swansea and Mumbles in Wales in 1807. 35. Horses remain the preferable mode for tram transport even after the arrival of steam engines until the end of the 19th century, because they were cleaner compared to steam-driven trams, which caused smoke in city streets. Steam power introduced. See also, steam locomotive. A replica of Trevithick's steam engine at the National Waterfront Museum in Swansea, Wales. In 1784, James Watt, a Scottish inventor and mechanical engineer, patented a design for a steam locomotive. Watt had improved the steam engine of Thomas Newcomen, hitherto used to pump water out of mines, and developed a reciprocating engine in 1769 capable of powering a wheel. This was a large stationary engine, powering cotton mills and a variety of machinery. The state of boiler technology necessitated the use of low-pressure steam acting upon a vacuum in the cylinder, which required a separate condenser and an air pump. Nevertheless, as the construction of boilers improved, Watt investigated the use of high-pressure steam acting directly upon a piston, raising the possibility of a smaller engine that might be used to power a vehicle. Following his patent, Watt's employee William Murdoch produced a working model of a self-propelled steam carriage in that year. 36. The first full-scale working railway steam locomotive was built in the United Kingdom in 1804 by Richard Trevithick, a British engineer born in Cornwall. This used high-pressure steam to drive the engine by one power stroke. The transmission system employed a large flywheel to even out the action of the piston rod. On February 21, 1804, the world's first steam-powered railway journey took place when Trevithick's unnamed steam locomotive hauled a train along the tramway of the Penydarren Ironworks, near Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales. 37. 38. Trevithick later demonstrated a locomotive operating upon a piece of circular rail track in Bloomsbury, London, the Catch Me Who Can, but never got beyond the experimental stage with railway locomotives, not least because his engines were too heavy for the cast iron plateway track then in use. 39. The first commercially successful steam locomotive was Matthew Murray's rack locomotive Salamanca, built for the Middleton Railway in Leeds in 1812. This twin-cylinder locomotive was light enough to not break the edge rail's track, and solved the problem of adhesion by a cogwheel using teeth cast on the side of one of the rails. Thus it was also the first rack railway. This was followed in 1813 by the locomotive Puffing Billy, built by Christopher Blackett and William Headley for the Wylam Colliery Railway, the first successful locomotive running by adhesion only. This was accomplished by the distribution of weight between a number of wheels. Puffing Billy is now on display in the Science Museum in London and is the oldest locomotive in existence. 40-41. In 1814, George Stephenson, inspired by the early locomotives of Trevithick, Murray and Headley, persuaded the manager of the Killingworth Colliery, where he worked, to allow him to build a steam-powered machine. Stephenson played a pivotal role in the development and widespread adoption of the steam locomotive. His designs considerably improved on the work of the earlier pioneers. He built the locomotive Blucher, also a successful flanged wheel adhesion locomotive. In 1825, he built the locomotive locomotion for the Stockton and Darlington Railway in the northeast of England, which became the first public steam railway in the world in 1825, although it used both horsepower and steam power on different runs. In 1829, he built the locomotive Rocket, which entered in and won the Rainhill trials. This success led to Stephenson establishing his company as the preeminent builder of steam locomotives for railways in Great Britain and Ireland, the United States, and much of Europe. 24-30 The first public railway which used only steam locomotives, all the time, was Liverpool and Manchester Railway, built in 1830. 43. Steam power continued to be the dominant power system in railways around the world for more than a century. Electric power introduced. See also, electric locomotive and railway electrification system. Lichterfelde tram, 1882. The first known electric locomotive was built in 1837 by chemist Robert Davidson of Aberdeen in Scotland, and it was powered by galvanic cells, batteries. Thus it was also the earliest battery electric locomotive. Davidson later built a larger locomotive named Galvani, exhibited at the Royal Scottish Society of Arts exhibition in 1841. The 7-ton vehicle had 2 direct-drive reluctance motors, with fixed electromagnets acting on iron bars attached to a wooden cylinder on each axle, and simple commutators. It hauled a load of 6 tons at 4 miles per hour, 6 kilometers per hour, for a distance of 1.5 miles, 2.4 kilometers. It was tested on the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway in September of the following year, but the limited power from batteries prevented its general use. It was destroyed by railway workers, who saw it as a threat to their job security. 44, 45, 46. By the middle of the 19th century, most European countries had military uses for railways. 47. Werner von Siemens demonstrated an electric railway in 1879 in Berlin. The world's first electric tram line, Gross-Lichterfelde Tramway, opened in Lichterfelde near Berlin, Germany, in 1881. It was built by Siemens. The tram ran on 180 volts DC, which was supplied by running rails. In 1891, the track was equipped with an overhead wire, and the line was extended to Berlin-Lichterfelde West Station. The Volks Electric Railway opened in 1883 in Brighton, England. The railway is still operational, thus making it the oldest operational electric railway in the world. Also in 1883, Mödling and Hinterbrühl tram opened near Vienna in Austria. It was the first tram line in the world in regular service powered from an overhead line. 5 years later, in the U.S., electric trolleys were pioneered in 1888 on the Richmond Union Passenger Railway, using equipment designed by Frank J. Sprague. 48. The first use of electrification on a main line was on a 4-mile section of the Baltimore Beltline of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, B&O. In 1895, connecting the main portion of the B&O to the new line to New York through a series of tunnels around the edges of Baltimore's downtown. Electricity quickly became the power supply of choice for subways, abetted by the Sprague's invention of multiple-unit train control in 1897. By the early 1900s, most street railways were electrified. Sketch showing about a dozen people standing on an underground railway platform with a train standing at the platform. Several more people are visible inside the train, which has the words Baker St visible on its side. Passengers waiting to board a tube train on the London Underground in the early 1900s. Sketch by unknown artist. The London Underground, the world's oldest underground railway, opened in 1863, and it began operating electric services using a fourth rail system in 1890 on the City and South London Railway, now part of the London Underground Northern Line. This was the first major railway to use electric traction. The world's first deep-level electric railway, it runs from the City of London, under the River Thames, to Stockwell in South London. 49. The first practical AC electric locomotive was designed by Charles Brown, then working for Oerlikon, Zurich. In 1891, Brown had demonstrated long-distance power transmission using three-phase AC between a hydroelectric plant at Lofton am Neckar and Frankfurt am Main West, a distance of 280 kilometers, 170 miles. Using experience he had gained while working for Gene Heilmann on steam electric locomotive designs, Brown observed that three-phase motors had a higher power-to-weight ratio than DC motors and, because of the absence of a commutator, were simpler to manufacture and maintain. However, they were much larger than the DC motors of the time and could not be mounted in underfloor bogies. They could only be carried within locomotive bodies. 51. In 1894, Hungarian engineer Kalman Kando developed a new type three-phase asynchronous electric drive motors and generators for electric locomotives. Kando's early 1894 designs were first applied in a short three-phase AC tramway in Avion-les-Bains, France, which was constructed between 1896 and 1898, 52-53. In 1896, Oerlikon installed the first commercial example of the system on the Lugano tramway. Each 30-ton locomotive had two 110 kilowatts, 150 horsepower, motors run by three-phase 750 V 40 Hz fed from double overhead lines. Three-phase motors run at a constant speed and provide regenerative braking, and are well suited to steeply graded routes, and the first mainline three-phase locomotives were supplied by Brown, by then in partnership with Walter Boveri, in 1899 on the 40 km Bergdorf Thun line, Switzerland. A prototype of a Ganz AC electric locomotive in Baltellina, Italy, 1901. Italian railways were the first in the world to introduce electric traction for the entire length of a main line rather than a short section. The 106 km Baltellina line was opened on September 4, 1902, designed by Kando and a team from the Ganz Works. 54-55. The electrical system was three-phase at 3 kV 15 Hz. In 1918-56, Kando invented and developed the rotary phase converter, enabling electric locomotives to use three-phase motors whilst supplied via a single overhead wire, carrying the simple industrial frequency, 50 Hz, single-phase AC of the high-voltage national networks, 55. Swiss and German co-production, world's first functional diesel, electric railcar 1914. Earliest recorded examples of an internal combustion engine for railway use included a prototype designed by William Dent Priestman. Sir William Thomson examined it in 1888 and described it as a Priestman oil engine mounted upon a truck which is worked on a temporary line of rails to show the adaptation of a petroleum engine for locomotive purposes. 58-59. In 1894, a 20 horsepower, 15 kilowatts, two-axle machine built by Priestman Brothers was used on the Hull docks. 60. In 1906, Rudolf Diesel, Adolf Close and the steam and diesel engine manufacturer Geberter Sulzer founded Diesel Sulzer Close GmbH to manufacture diesel-powered locomotives. Sulzer had been manufacturing diesel engines since 1898. The Prussian State Railways ordered a diesel locomotive from the company in 1909. The world's first diesel-powered locomotive was operated in the summer of 1912 on the Winterthur, Romanshorn Railway in Switzerland, but was not a commercial success. 61. The locomotive weight was 95 tons and the power was 883 kilowatts with a maximum speed of 100 kilometers per hour, 62 miles per hour. 62. Small numbers of prototype diesel locomotives were produced in a number of countries through the mid-1920s. The Soviet Union operated 3 experimental units of different designs since late 1925, though only one of them, the EL-2, proved technically viable. 63. A significant breakthrough occurred in 1914 when Hermann Lemp, a General Electric electrical engineer, developed and patented a reliable direct current electrical control system. Subsequent improvements were also patented by Lemp. 64. Lemp's design used a single lever to control both engine and generator in a coordinated fashion, and was the prototype for all diesel, electric locomotive control systems. In 1914, world's first functional diesel, electric rail cars were produced for the Königlich Staatseisenbahnen, Royal Saxon State Railways, by Wagenfabrik Rastatt with electric equipment from Braun, Boveri and C and diesel engines from Swiss Sulzer AG. They were classified as DT1 and DT2, de.wiki. The first regular used diesel. Electric locomotives were switcher, shunter, locomotives. General Electric produced several small switching locomotives in the 1930s. The famous 44-tonner switcher was introduced in 1940. Westinghouse Electric and Baldwin collaborated to build switching locomotives starting in 1929.